China EVs and more, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I'm the managing director at Sino-Auto Insights, a management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, good evening. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening from my side. I'm your co-host Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. This is episode number 81. The plot thickens. I guess that's how I would recap the week since our last episode in the realm of China and global EV, AV, and mobility space. Heck, we might as well call ourselves World EVs and more, right?
Well, geopolitics makes it world, right?
So especially with the news coming out the last couple of days, and here's how I'm going to spin the headlines. So Nvidia and AMD are being restricted from sales of chips to China and Russia, by the way. We had the transfer of power at one of the world's largest automakers with the most powerful supervisory board. We have new investments from Honda and Toyota in battery manufacturing here in the US, roughly $7 billion combined. We have
huge
Chengdu and Shenzhen in lockdown mode. And the Chengdu Motor Show ending abruptly due to COVID control measures. And we have a shocking shuffle in terms of rankings of China EV Inc. in August deliveries. Some continue to grow, some fell off a cliff, and shocking sale of BYD shares from Berkshire Hathaway. The Warren Buffett-backed BYD is now backed less by Warren Buffett.
A couple of percentage points less.
0.6%, roughly,
yes,
to be exact.
Oh, man.
So that's the plot.
They got people freaking out. Let's start with the sales numbers.
Sales numbers, it's like a deck of cards, right? You shuffle it, you never know who's going to be on top. Last month, Neta became the top. Aside from GAC Ion, which is sometimes are not listed as this smart EV startup because they had a earlier start. But in terms of new ones that began sales in 2018 or later, so Neta is about to hit 20K. It's about to join the 20K club.
I saw that.
While the others, let's say the big three, I don't want to use the word struggling, but they're facing some issues, especially XPeng and Li Auto. It was not so surprising given the fact that in their earnings calls, they've already admitted to they were facing some issues with orders and with certain models. So, but to see, XPeng, I think, was almost from 15,000 units to 9,500 units. And Li Auto was a huge fall. Whereas NIO kind of stayed right where they are, actually. So, applause. What do you think?
So the one other EV maker that stood out to me in a positive or two was Leap Motor. They got the record 12,525 units. And Ito, which got over 10,000 units, right?
Welcome to the 10K club, as we say.
Yes. So what we're seeing is the domestics that aren't named NIO, XPeng, and Li Auto outperform. And I think that is a reflection of maybe the lower tier cities taking on more EVs, where the Netas and the Itos and the Leap Motors are going to be a little bit stronger than the 4 tier 1 cities, right? So
Yeah, Ito is...
really quickly, the other thing, because I wanted your take on this, was Voya at 2.4 thousand. That seems, and I know that they were, last month was not great either, but I don't remember them being that low. So
No, I think they're fine. They're in a few thousand units mode. But they did put out that their average transaction price was over 370K. So that's just under, what, 55,000? Around $55,000.
that's a good number for them.
Yeah. No, I want to go back to Ito because Ito, everything is EREV, right? They're M7 and M5, and they're launching the coming week the M5 EV, which is the BEV version. So Ito, I think, is one of the, I guess, dark horses. But, considering that they have this Huawei, kind of Huawei inside and utilizing Huawei's channels, so I don't know, that could be a plus. But it was interesting if you see the press release of both XPeng and Li Auto, there was nothing on why it fell month on month. Rather,
Right.
the press release from Li Auto was all about the L8, being that the month it's revealed, it's going to be delivered. And we had heard Li Xiang talk about that they're speeding up that model to replace the One. And same for XPeng. There's a lot of talk about the G9, soon being officially launched. And I think they talked enough about it in the earnings call. So there's, you see the message that they didn't want to go into that fall too much.
So we kind of talked about it a little bit on Twitter earlier this week, how I couldn't believe Li Auto management didn't see any real cannibalization when launching the L9 of the Li One, right? So
you know what the problem could be is they had this long lead time, not the lead time, but they started campaigning for the L9 like several months ago, like tweeting out, teasing out features, pictures. This long lead up, I think, already affected. I think that kind of tactic could be backfiring when it comes to the One. And also the One did have some quality issues here and there.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it just competition. It's old. It feels old. That's, the China EV Inc. time is... right? It's months. It's not years.
It has to be less than 18 months, right?
So, and same for XPeng. We talked about that last episode, especially seeing, both the P7 and the P5, not that great in August.
Yeah, for XPeng, it seems to be maybe a loss of focus because of the challenges that they had or they're having in the foreign markets.
Right. And also seeing this rankings come out, it makes me think to that chart that Bloomberg ETF put out of the boxed in, right? The small EVs, 100%. The bigger, larger SUVs, they have a very high penetration, whereas in the middle, it's low. But the August EV sales rankings doesn't reflect that. Right, the Nettas and the Leap Motors, they're priced in that sweet spot, in that middle spot, and they're leading. Well, at least in August.
But the crazy thing is also, Lei, is that the P5 and P7 are sedans, right? So that market is not as large as the SUV market, right?
And that's why they can't wait for the G9 to launch, to be delivered.
But launching after the ES7 and the L9, I think is going to be really tough for them now to really gain any voice for that product, especially as a 5-seater, which is a head scratcher to me. So they're going to have to really, really focus on, because Li Auto is just reinforcing that whole family thing with the L9 for sure.
Right. We had this past week the ES7 start deliveries, the L9 finally starting deliveries on like the second to last day of the month.
And China Driven will got his ET7 delivered, right? So, hey, Will, I don't know about that green, man, but congrats.
That's his color, right?
And that I think we're all banking on, and you contradict me if you don't think this, but I really feel a flawless launch of the ET5 will get Neo up into that 18,000-20,000 a month range within a few months, because it's a good looking car, and it should take and win most of those fights against the Model 3, which is really long in the tooth and really old for China terms, right? China EV timeframes.
Yet Tesla remains strong based on August.
77,000 units, man.
That's almost their highest in recent memory, if I'm remembering correctly.
And more impressive than that is the fact that it's period 2 of a quarter, not period 3.
Yeah, it's the middle month of the quarter.
Exactly.
Though how much of that is export, we don't know. I bet there's a lot. And if we've seen the domestic registration numbers, my guess is probably around, 30,000 plus domestic, 40,000 export. Could be something like that.
So they're still solidly at around 30,000 units a month.
Yeah, and if we look at this consistency, GAC Ion is consistently growing, closing in on 30K. Tesla and BYD, so the suspense is whether they're going to report. So last month it was, over 160,000? So they could, be very well close to 200K. And if we add just these 12 players together, so the 10 that was announced today, roughly 100,000, BYD 200,000, Tesla 77,000, so that's 370,000 NEVs.
At a 500,000 monthly take rate.
Right, or 600,000 units right now. And that's the...
So that's more than half.
Yeah. And but having said all of this, it's 1 month.
But there's also the fine print on that lay is that as Nvidia or not Nvidia, Neo, Tesla, Xpeng, Li Auto is the exception this month, kind of stays at the same volume. Somebody else is taking it, right? And that's the Nettas, that's the Leap Motors, and that's the Itos, right? So we're going to get to 600,000 units a month, but most of that's going to the domestic players we weren't expecting it from, right? And with Shenzhen and lockdown, I was told that the Shenzhen lockdown isn't as severe as the Chengdu lockdown.
Right, Chengdu is right now almost like a mass lockdown, right?
It's Shanghai-like.
It's deja vu Shanghai, yeah, right. So just a reminder, I believe Volkswagen and Toyota have manufacturing operations in Chengdu. I think Toyota stopped. The latest, yeah, is what I've heard.
Oh, really? Okay. So despite those gray clouds still being there that you and I have said continuously throughout this year's episodes, that despite that, we're still going to get to 600,000 units, right? Will that be able to continue with a Chengdu and a Shenzhen possibly being locked down for multiple weeks? If BYD is unable to manufacture, it's going to be really hard to get to that 600,000 units. So
it doesn't look like we're going to see a Shanghai again. That's my view, because that would be very extreme, which would be helpful to at least to the sales that we're talking about.
Well, the other thing too is we probably won't see that because of October 16th being right around the corner, right?
That's the other plot.
Yeah. So for those that don't keep track of Chinese politics, October 16th is, I'm not sure what it's formally called.
The 20th, whatever, Party Congress, the 20th Party Congress, once every 5 years. Yeah.
And it's normally when they would reelect or elect a new leader. And this occasion is unprecedented because Xi Jinping will be getting his third term. And most presidencies are limited to 10 years. So,
well, he rewrote the the rules, right?
Yeah.
So Constitution. So, yeah. But just lastly, on the rankings again, it's 1 month. Once October 1st comes around, I bet it's going to be another shuffle. And you're going to see somebody climb up and somebody go down.
So we are getting into the really, really high sales months. So we would likely see
the so-called golden September, silver October season.
Yes. And so if Chengdu and Shenzhen lockdowns currently do not affect long-term production, we could see an 800,000 unit month in the next couple. So, and if the current trends continue, then guys like Aito, Leap Motor, Neta are going to gain a ton of share from those months.
And I'm still optimistic, bullish on the numbers, though not as bullish as the Secretary General of CPCA. So he's maintaining 6.5 NEVs, million NEVs and 6 million NEPVs. Mine's at 6.25. So he's more bullish than I am.
I think he has a little more inside information than you do, though, man. So
yeah. So that gives you an idea. So 6.5 last year was 3.5. So it's almost doubled, right? Again.
And it should be noted that global, let's say NEV, because we'll include hybrids. So global NEV sales are forecasted to be around 10 million units this year. So that would mean that China takes on 65% of that. And let me kind of anecdotally give you what happened last night. So for those that don't know, I came back to Detroit for a while to visit family, do some business here, and went to a networking event at a WeWork that was held by a couple of the NGOs that for the state of Michigan and an incubator called Plug and Play. And, I think people are starting to wake up, the people that I've spoken with, because, out of the 5 or 7 people I spoke with at length, 2 or 3 of them were really interested in what I had to say and what my thoughts were on how I feel the U.S. markets will play out, especially because of the recent approval of the IRA and how things are getting shuffled. Recent announcements, like you said earlier, Toyota committing $5.8 billion of investment to a battery factory. Is it in South Carolina?
North Carolina.
And, I think it's an exciting time for the United States. It's still pretty messy. I teased you earlier this week, Lei, with pictures of Rivian, the Rivian office, and the pictures of the Lordstown, Michigan offices. But, the other thing I talked about was how many more brands there are and products there are in China. Because if the United States hopes to get into the millions of units in sales each month, then we need to see many, many, many more products in the United States. It can't just be Tesla and Rivian and Lucid and Kia, right? So I think that's important. And, that article about Bloomberg, or the Bloomberg article, was it today or yesterday, about how Volkswagen customers are really wanting to return their ID series vehicles because of the software bugs, is really alarming. We've beaten this drum so many times about how software plays such an important role for Volkswagen. And I hadn't heard up until that point about cars being returned or sold within 6 months of purchase. That's pretty extreme. So
Yeah, we've dunked on Volkswagen enough times.
And that's Europeans. So
And they love Volkswagens, right? So
and they don't need the same type of functionality as a Chinese consumer, right? So, but let's talk that new restriction that we saw from the US government. I think that is a huge, huge thing. So the Biden administration sent a notice to Nvidia and AMD restricting a license to sell to China specifically and Russia specifically some of their higher end chips that run servers in data centers and would run the operating systems for autonomous vehicles. And so, you had gotten some of the Chinese takes. So what have you read and seen on Weibo and Weixin in response, Lei?
well, no matter how you look at it, this is definitely going to affect, at least in the scope of what we are talking about, AVs, in the sense that in China, many of these China EV Inc., they use on the vehicle side the Nvidia Orin chips, right, which can be substituted by companies like Horizon Robotics or Black Sesame. That's on the vehicle end of it. But then there's the cloud end, which is what many of these China EV Inc. are using and dependent on NVIDIA, as well as, for example, XPeng's data center, computer center that they just set up.
Yes.
Some of these, the A100 and the H100 chips used on the cloud side of it for their autonomous vehicle development. Now, in that case, there's no Horizon Robotics to substitute. That's the nature of this.
So they need those chips to run simulations effectively.
Yeah, simulations, training, whatever, which is what He Xiaopeng said today on his WeChat moments, right? And then he says something which I didn't quite understand, that they pre-purchased a lot of these, pre-ordered or whatever. So I don't know how that solves the problem, but the latest update is that NVIDIA said in I think they've gotten an extension from the SEC, which is to perform exports needed to provide support for U.S. customers of A100 through March next year, and the other two chips order fulfillment and logistics through the company's Hong Kong facility through September 2023. So I guess there's kind of a grace period. But as you pointed out, this could very well escalate into something deeper, more troubling, which is the vehicle side of it. Then, it's for a Mach-E who's trying to get a free 8155 upgrade. Forget about it. Forget about you sharing this, trying to have 5 friends to download the app, or that won't work, right?
Right.
So I think that's...
And that last night, that answered my question, because why wasn't Qualcomm part of that? And they don't make server chips, basically.
Right.
Or chips that would mainly be used on servers. Yeah. So to give you all an indication of how this affects NVIDIA, last quarter they made about $400 million US. So let's project that out to 1.6 billion in annual sales. Last year they had $26 billion in revenue. So these chips, they're growing, first of all. So I think that needs to be said. But they're about 6% of their current revenues. So not insignificant.
Yeah, and Jensen had sent that internal letter, right? You've seen that. Basically saying, we're going to try to work with the customers in order to fulfill, and also trying to ask the SEC to kind of, help them with this kind of the grace period. And they were try to find alternatives. if there's any.
And so if we take two steps back, there's a couple things that we should unpack with this. It keeps that threat of going a bit further restrictions on the Chinese market for higher end chips in autonomous vehicles or higher level ADAS. And the larger picture needs to be in addition to the restrictions and subsidies that are squeezing out Chinese supply chains for batteries, it's really, really, the United States is really focusing on putting the squeeze on China a bit. So
right, the thing on AVs is in China is if you look at these China EV Inc. launching new models, more often than not, the two companies that they will mention in their marketing are Nvidia and Qualcomm. Okay, and I mean there is the Horizon Robotics, there is others, but these two, in terms of the cockpit, right, the cockpit part of it, the AV computing part of it, there
is no substitute.
They're very dependent on these two companies.
We're talking about if they get frozen out of those chips by Nvidia and Qualcomm, the autonomous vehicle progress just stops in its tracks.
And that's why we have these companies, Horizon. We have the Black Sesames. The L8, I think the L8 that's being launched is going to have the Horizon Journey 5, the latest chip. So that's one way to kind of avoid this issue. But it takes time, right?
Yeah, but the reality is that the Horizon chips and the Black Sesame chips, and there's a couple other Chinese chip designers that get a decent amount of funding. They're years behind Nvidia and Qualcomm from the standpoint of being able to design chips that run as fast as Nvidia's and Qualcomm's do. And there's another wrinkle, because even if Horizon and Black Sesame or SMIC can design a chip that runs as fast as what's out there by NVIDIA and Qualcomm and even Mobileye, the Chinese domestic industry needs to be able to fab them. And currently there are restrictions on Chinese companies buying equipment to fab at the 5 nanometer and below level. So it's like multi-pronged challenges being thrown at them. So it's complicated.
And if we go talk about this protectionism, and this has been going on both sides of the ocean, right? So very long time, the battery cells. Okay, that's right. That's how CATL basically benefited. And now we have this IRA, we have this chip restriction, and what's gonna happen? How China responds, right? This tit for tat, right?
And they will respond. And I sent a tweet that said Ford and GM might have gotten, their jobs might have gotten a lot harder in China because there's going to be retaliation. There always is. And to your point, we should let people know that years ago, was it 7 years ago, 8 years ago, Lei, that there was a white list of battery cell manufacturers, about 17 of them that the Chinese government had published that said, if you want subsidies for the vehicles, you need to buy from these 17 suppliers. And it excluded the Koreans, it excluded the Japanese, and all of these 17 just happened to be Chinese companies. And so to your point, it really, really gave CATL that jumpstart it needed to become who they are now. And it wasn't a big deal to the West because nobody cared at that time about electric vehicles.
And the amazing thing is the China NEV sales are just chugging along despite these, we call them the black swan events, despite the cloud thickening, right? That's what we're kind of witnessing here.
And then not only that, but then all the while, companies like Lucid and Rivian adjusting their forecast down because they're in complete manufacturing hell and supply chain hell and sourcing hell for chips, right? So we're definitely seeing, generally speaking, the Chinese EV makers able to manage the challenges a little bit better than their US counterparts. And so, but we have to remember Rivian and Lucid are $100,000 cars, so they're not mass market cars anyways.
Yeah.
So we're not going to see hundreds of thousands of sales out of those two companies, not until they get a sub $50,000 car, right?
We wouldn't have thought of this chip shortage turn into this kind of chip shortage.
Yeah.
So,
and, I'd also alluded to XPeng kind of knew that this was a possibility. So not only did they hoard chips, it seems, because of supply chain, but they probably had their risk assessment or risk management internal team look at the possibility of the United States government restricting these chips. And so he hoarded them. But again, to your point, I don't know what it means because does XPeng have a certain number of servers that they're going to put online and then that's it? Or it's a little cryptic, that message, and I didn't understand it. So I'm glad that you fluently being able to read it also kind of didn't get it as well.
Well, it just kind of means that they were prepared somewhat, that they have a contingency. So there's a good and a bad. So that's what he was saying. But
the crazy thing is, how is Tesla going to react in China to this? How, because they have data centers in China, right? And Cadillac, right? Ford.
And then He Xiaopeng, he kind of took a shot at FSD and saying that we're going to be more superior with the all scenario smart assisted driving, which is, he's saying that a wider rollout nationally will be next year. Basically the city NGP. And do you remember we were on a call with Brian Gu?
Mm-hmm.
Quite
a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Almost a year ago.
He was saying that possibly one of the southern cities, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, being the first city to allow them to have that. And it hasn't happened. So it's taking longer.
We should note that Robin Lee there's a conference this week, right?
Yeah, WAIC.
AC?
WAIC following the WNEVC. All these conferences.
Well, in about 2 weeks, we're going to have a bunch of acronym conferences too. So the NAIAS, right?
Well, nobody's showing up. Auto show.
Well, yeah. Not a lot. The highlight's probably going to be the Mustang Wednesday, right? So the what I wanted to say was Robin had said during the WAIC that he sees AV adoption faster than the current forecast out there. So,
well, he has a point, and also I think I agree with him. Not 100%, but mostly because in China, at least, L2 is it's almost every car now.
Ubiquitous.
It's ubiquitous.
Yeah.
L4 pretty soon. It's already happening, right? They've already done 1 million. Right.
Yeah, because he's playing a major part in that, right? Or at least Apollo is, right? So
yeah, so there's really not much in terms of middle ground with respect to L3. I think that's what he said that. But outside of China, I think L3 in certain markets, at least in limited scenarios, like the Mercedes, it's still being considered or tested or being commercialized. Although he did say that L3 is going to take much longer, which he is correct because of the responsibility issue.
As he says that, it's almost like simultaneous. Cruise sends an update or for their software or something like that.
A recall?
So it's like, oh my God. the irony of that statement. But I think we should look at autonomous vehicle adoption needs to be looked at on a regional basis and country specific basis. And what we're going to see, mark my words, and I've said this before, is that the US companies and the Chinese companies launching pilots in other regions in 2023 and 2024 and try to divide the rest of the world up into these fiefdoms where Cruise runs the city of Munich and Baidu Apollo might run Stuttgart or something like that, right? Just kind of like that.
Yeah. Well, there's the California companies, but there's no Americanese companies.
Yes, that's you need to work on that. I don't know about that one, but California work, but American that sounds like a food, actually, type of food.
Californese companies.
That chip thing was actually kind of a surprise to me. So, and it should be noted, because I don't think we talked about this last week. It should be noted that the SEC or the PCAOB and the Chinese auditor,
that agreement or
signed an agreement. So
it's not even called an agreement. It's called something else, right?
But the threat of being delisted has gone down significantly now. And I believe the accounting board is ready to send a bunch of auditors over to Hong Kong to have these Chinese companies that are listed in the US now completely and fully audited to be in compliance with the rest of the companies on US markets.
I thought it was to audit the not the companies themselves, but the accounting companies. I thought that was the thing.
I don't know.
I remember, if I remember correctly, but anyways, it's an auditing trip. So yes, for sure,
some interesting stuff going on this week. So
yeah, I just wanted to go back to this new brands thing a bit because I wanted to talk a little bit about the Dongfeng M Hero.
Sure.
Or Mengshi or M brand. I don't even know what their English name for the Mengshi, which is warrior, transliterally, brand. And I think that the significance of this brand launch, a lot of people don't know that the chairman, Zhu Yanfeng, he said something that was well quoted in the industry 20 years ago when he was the young president of FAW Group. He said in an interview that we needed to kind of be patient for 20 years for kind of Chinese brands to be stronger or to be relevant. And he was ridiculed for that comment. And now 20 years later, when he's launched this brand 2 years after launching the Voya brand, it almost feels like he is vindicated. Yeah. So I think this is one part of the significance of this brand launch. And the other one is basically Dongfeng is the second auto works was kind of the military focused truck maker. And if you look at the military parades, more than often than not, you're going to find Dongfeng trucks, the military vehicles. So this is in their DNA. And that's why they launched this premium off-road brand. And it was very extreme, I think, more extreme than anything that you've ever seen from any other kind of off-road vehicle brands.
I think you're being very kind. So
no, what I'm saying is, if anybody is going to launch this type of thing, it's going to be Dongfeng.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
On the extreme side. And he did mention that they've gotten to a point where they feel confident enough in terms of technology, brand, product value that they can launch this thing. And also, when we talk about this Chinese consumers, we talk about the second half of the smart EV game. EVs are a given. Smart part of it is another given, but one more is this individualized, personalized, kind of nationalistic choice that the Chinese consumers, they're very kind of acceptable to these new, very specific segments that nobody would have thought of.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's the time, it's right, it's the timing, it's the market conditions, environment that these things happen. So I think that's just what this brand is about.
These extreme niche brands or products work in China because the market is so large.
Yeah, and this is 6 years in the making, by the way. So they've thought about this for a long time.
Yeah, it is. I'm American, so I look at it and I'm like, okay, it's like a transformer almost looking kind of
very cut. Yeah, very
But I'm sure there's a buyer out there for it in China for certain.
Yeah, I think the Voya's success so far has given them confidence. They already have 16,000 customers of the Voya cars.
So, and this is the crazy thing. Generally speaking, man, it's all the Chinese domestic players are super hopeful about the market, and it's the foreign players that need a hug,
that are hesitant, that don't seem to know where they are, where they want to go to. They're slow to react. They don't have the right products.
Yeah, and your point earlier about they're smart, there's this Chinese individualism thing, but you're assuming the smart part for the legacies, and I think that's a huge bridge, for them to cross, or a huge river for them to cross. And I'm talking German, Japanese, Korean, American. The legacies are still just learning how to code, to be quite frank. And so the smart part is not a given for those guys. And what's likely to happen for Volkswagen to play catch up is that they're going to have to partner. And Bluma made a point of saying that we are probably going to use the new CarPlay by Apple. And that's like inviting the wolf into the henhouse. So if he thinks he can outsmart Apple because he's Porsche, are you kidding me, dude? You're playing on Apple's turf. You're not playing on Porsche's turf. Remember that. So I think he needs to be careful about relying on Apple too much. Okay? So.
And it's interesting to see that the three guys, Dees, Ralph, and Wallenstein, they've all posted their messages on LinkedIn. And there's some interesting comments made. And I think what I see is that they understand the change. They understand what the market wants. But at the end of the day, it's just delivering and executing that's not there. So
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think Dees, because he understood what was needed and he tried his darndest to make those pivots on behalf of Volkswagen Group, and he wasn't supported, and the rest of Volkswagen management were just sheep and didn't back him on these tough decisions that he was making, he became the sacrificial lamb because Brandstatter, he's a lifer, and Bluma, he's a lifer. So it's like, there's got to be pain. There's got to be pain in order to really make these changes. It can't be a kumbaya moment the entire time. So
I think Dees was just too much of a maverick, and probably in the view of the supervisory board. But what he did say was in a LinkedIn message, he said, the future of our industry can be brilliant, but we have to change fast. And what Bloom said, what Volkswagen Group, Bloom doesn't have a Twitter or LinkedIn account. It was Volkswagen Group putting out the messages today for him. And he's basically saying, we're going to continue what these legacy, but with a kind of a slight tweak, right? They mentioned about the e-fuels. They mentioned about, continuing with this path of e-mobility and at a certain time go faster. So you see this, okay, I agree, but at the same time, I tend to hold back a little bit. And that Bloomberg article basically also said about, the change is not going to be that significant, at least in the early part of his tenure.
Yeah, that e-fuels thing is a boondoggle. He needs to scrap that and focus more. Your tweet was hilarious. First of all, having 10 priorities, that was just like, okay.
China was number 3. China is still very important ahead of North America.
But how they think about that is totally wrong. It needs to just be blocking and tackling. And to me, software now is blocking and tackling. It's basic stuff that you need to be really good at, because the rest of the stuff doesn't matter if you're not really good at the blocking and tackling or just the basic stuff. So anyways.
And I want to share an interesting line from Wallenstein's post on LinkedIn, which said, and I quote, "At a time when it is getting increasingly popular to talk about China and its people without even having a profound first-hand experience, it is worth stating China is a great country with wonderful people. It is far from being perfect, but at the same time, far from being evil. Let us talk with each other rather than about each other." I feel like this message is also to Ralph, because he said, people without the profound first-hand experience. So you need to be here. And
I'm sure. And probably Bluma.
Yeah, well, he graduated from Shanghai, from Tongji University, so he can brag. But yeah, and I guess maybe, they need something new, that rather than having people with the on-the-ground experience, they bring in the outsiders, sort of, even though they're still the insiders. But
I don't know, man.
Who knows?
So,
and the other, I think, interesting numbers for our listeners, I think worth mentioning, is this China's internet development numbers that was put out by Qin Gang, the ambassador. 1.05 billion people are internet users in China. That's 3 times the population of the US and 3/4 of China's population. And this is something that has everything to do with what's going on in the China EV, AV, and mobility space.
Well, it sets the expectation for the consumer, right?
Yeah.
And that just happens to be the consumer in China. So, yeah, man, I think we're good for this evening, unless anyone has any last-second questions.
Yeah, same here. And maybe a housekeeping issue. So China EVs and More is now a media partner for Move America. Basically, claims to be the #1 tech and mobility startup show. That'll be happening on September 27 to 28 at the Palmer Event Center in Austin. And we're happy to be a media partner. If you're interested to attend, we have some discount codes. So just wanted to mention that. Yeah, looking forward to Detroit, Austin, maybe West Coast later on in the year.
We will be traveling extensively throughout the year in the United States, because I didn't come back to sit in Detroit for months at a time. So you'll see me and Lei hopefully out and about in LA, in San Francisco, Boston perhaps. So when we make our trips, we'll definitely let folks know, so that if there's a convenient time to grab a beer, we could do that. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.